So does anybody know, did we lose Greg Olson?
You mean Gary Olson? He's actually in the tractor while he's
That's
doing
why we
this,
want to talk to him.
planting corn. So he kind of goes in and out as he can. He's loading a semi right now.
Oh.
So he'll come back into the conversation. But yeah, he's been in the tractor this whole time, really multitasking. So
That's great. Well, it's good to be involved with cultivating the earth while you're cultivating your congregation. I think that's great, great sharing that he can do. Well, did everybody have a good lunch? Nod your head. Ah, yes. I was lucky today because my wife made me a sandwich. She never does that. So she knew I was down here and she made me a sandwich. So I feel like I got away with something today. Well, we're going to go into the next afternoon part of our time together. And this is going to be our creative time. So I hope you can get out of that right side of your logical brain and into your creative side. This will be an opportunity for you to do some creative work and to have a little bit of fun. We're going to be talking about stories and the importance of stories. And as you recall, from the very beginning of time, stories have been the way in which we've communicated the gospel. And a lot of times we were a part of a storytelling culture. The Christian movement got its start by telling stories. In fact, it had to because we weren't a literate culture. Back in the days of Jesus and the early church, the church was largely illiterate, the people that were a part of the church. And so they relied on telling stories to each other as a way to tell about the gospel, to tell the story of Jesus and where it came from. And if you think about it, you know, we've got all these great hymns. I love to tell the story, yada, 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 about the whole gospel message and stuff like that. And there's a reason for that, and that is that stories are memorable. Just think about the things that are in your head if you had to think about it. If I asked you to tell me what your mission statement is as a church, you probably couldn't do that. But you could probably give me all the words to Gilligan's Island theme song. You know, if you think about what's in your head, you'll know there's all these passwords and places you got to be and figures and facts. Maybe some of those things are in there. But the thing that seems to have the greatest memory to it are stories. And stories get told over and over again. My dad was a great storyteller. And every time he told the story, it got better and better. In fact, I would be at some of these events and I knew these things didn't happen, but he would make the story very interesting by adding all kinds of new details to it. Stories require imagination, but what stories do when we do brain studies is they connect little synapses of our brain to other different things. And so stories are something that we oftentimes don't give much value to, but they have tremendous power and they have the ability to propel us into new ways of being as groups of people. So a story has the ability to influence the future. And it has particularly strong ability to influence the future of a church, more than working on a mission statement, more than working on anything else. So there's been some research that's been done that show that stories are 22 times more memorable than any statistic. So if you tell somebody a story about something that happened to you in the grocery store, chances are a day or two later, they'd be able to remember that to you and recall that for you. But if you told them that 36% of the population had oatmeal for breakfast, they wouldn't be able to remember that 2 days later. The brain's not hardwired for fact. The brain, though, is hardwired for stories. And again, that's the early way in which Jesus told us the message as well, through parables and other stories with powerful meaning. So research has shown from Stanford that stories are quite a bit more memorable. They did an experiment where they had 10 students trying to influence somebody's viewpoint. And 9 of the students were restricted to just citing facts and figures and logic in order to try to encourage people to act a certain way or do some sort of action. And one person told a story. 10 minutes later, 65% could remember the story, but only 5% could remember the facts. And they've replicated this study over and over again, and it shows beyond a shadow of a doubt that stories have a lot of power to them. Now, one of the things that a lot of people will say is it's hard to create a story. And there's some reasons for that. Sometimes if we don't have an inkling of some truth to it, then it's hard to just create a story out of nothing. But when they start really doing research on writer's block, which is one of the things that happens for people that are struggling to tell a story, the reason that they have writer's block isn't because they don't have any ideas. It's because we can't clear our mind to think about what is essential that we want to put into the story. It's like we have too many ideas, and that's what makes it very difficult to work with. So we're going to do an exercise, and you're going to do it by yourself right now, and I'll give it to you here real quickly. And that is, we're going to ask you to write a 6-word novel. A 6-word novel, not 7 words, not 5 words, just 6 words. So Ernest Hemingway developed this exercise, and it's a fantastic way of helping us to try to get ourselves into some great initial thoughts for story writing. And Hemingway, I don't know if you know this, he used to frequent bars once in a while. And one night when he was in a bar, he was challenged by a guy to write a 6-word novel. They said, you can't do this. And Ernest Hemingway took him up on it. He worked all night on it. And the next day he came back with his 6-word novel. Would you like to see it? For sale, baby shoes, never worn. Now, if you look at those 6 words, you know, you can see that there's action that's taking place. There's something that's going on. It asks you to ask more questions than it does to give you answers. So when you see that for sale baby shoes, there's something very sad behind that. Baby shoes that have never been worn before. Powerful novel, and it's only 6 words long. It evokes some feeling. It evokes some thought process on our part. It doesn't answer the questions, but it engages us in a creative thought process. So as you guessed it, what you're going to do right now is we're going to give you 5 minutes to write a 6-word novel. And I'm going to set my timer, and we'll put you to work. Try to come up with 6 words that can tell a story about anything. It doesn't have to be your church. It doesn't have to be anything specific. Just a 6-word novel. And when we come back, I'm going to pick some people to share. Go.
listen to somebody who's going to go up.
You have 1 more minute. If you have your story done already, your 6-word novel, go ahead and enter it into the chat box.
Oh.
There's a chat box again.
It's at the bottom of your screen. Oops. Sarah, you need to unshare your screen. There we go. Oh man, we're getting a lot of them in here. Good for you guys.
Come on.
Wow. Can you all see the group chat? I'm going to start and I'll read some of these. Child never seen, God's lost too. Great job on that one. Elderly parents moved far during a pandemic. Brother loses, battle with depression. More wellness check shows our love. Found home, family, dog, brings peace. I see you, stay with me. That's great. Nothing is impossible. Never say never. He has a lot to learn. What happened? I'm hurt. Are you? We're blessed from above and around. We used to eat, not anymore. After reading Hemingway, why ever try? Feeling hungry. Smells good, all welcome. Welcome back, you were missed, celebrate. Family man, Jesus joy, dream small. Employment, 47 years, still love. Pandemic, fear, unity, comfort, hope, community. Don't waste this suffering, share hope. Dehorning cattle, blood spatters, mink coat. Okay. Spring, Minnesota, warm boots required. Work today, tomorrow we'll thank you. Seeds, potting soil, growing lights. Tall mountain, hiking shoes, hungry porcupine. New trend, long hair, no makeup. Jean, the lawyer is reading mother's will. David, rest now, little one, not done. Grandchildren, missing hugs, stupid pandemic. God. Future lover, power, passion, grace, go. Out of money, not my fault, from my college kids. Eric hired, recovery, Reggie, his dog. These are great. I hope you'll take time to read the rest of those. They're wonderful. You guys all did a great job doing that. I'm liking working with you. You're a creative group of folks. Let me show you some other examples of some 6-word novels that people have done. These are some of the favorites that I've seen over the years. I'm gonna have to push it here. Label, not for oral use. Oops. Artist Bane, fresh idea, empty pen. Never again invite both girlfriends to graduation. What could possibly go wrong? Dinner for two, widower and memories. I asked, you answered with silence. Why are you in my selfie? Tripped over luck, stumbled upon tragedy. The exits were entrances in disguise. Adventures percolate stories, stories inspire dreams. That's one of my favorites that I've seen over the years. So when you look at these 6-word stories and you look in the chat and the stories that you all have done, you see that there's no shortage of creativity within the group. But you probably, if you were like me in this exercise, you start with a list of words and then you try to pull those words together in a way that makes sense and that starts to do some things that are important on that. So a 6-word novel is based on our why is going to be our next exercise. I want you to think about the year being 2025, and I want you to think about that deep center that you've already identified as a congregation. And I want you to think again about maybe a 6-word novel that you could put together. Start with a free association of words, pick 6 words that have the most power for you and put those together in a way that's meaningful. And what we're gonna do is do this in our small groups. And Dean, I'd ask you to set the timer for 10 minutes on this. When you guys see the timer reach 5 minutes, then you need to move towards talking as a group about your 6-word stories, your 6-word novels, and start sharing those with each other. So this is a 10-minute exercise. You ready? Go ahead as soon as you can, Dean. Wow, you're all back. Let's go ahead and enter in some 6-word novels into the comment box. Let us know again, 6-word novels about your church. Put them in the chat box.
All right.
So hopefully you can read everybody else's 6-word novels and see what's going on. My life was a living hell. That's interesting. Life interrupted. Going all in for God's kids. Oh, that's wonderful. Going all in for God's family. Beginnings, endings, loved happily ever after. All right. It looks like you guys understand the 6-word novel concept. You know, each of these statements, if you look at them, and this will be in your follow-up information that you receive, you'll get all of these to look at. Oh, here's another good one. Church building hangout for kids. Alleluia. Oh, that's wonderful. Once you get these, look them over, but each sentence provokes thought, doesn't it? It provokes us to think about the future. It provokes us to think in a different way than if we just wrote down the church agreed to double worship attendance over the next 5 years. You know, that's meaningless. This evokes some feeling. This evokes some power to it. It evokes some movement to it. And when we get around to developing our future story, you get a lot more than 6 words. But to go through this practice of writing 6 words, I think is a valuable experience for all of us. I'm going to move you into another exercise just because you love doing this so much. Am I right? And this exercise is going to be done in your church groups again. I want you to look at this picture on the screen in front of you. You'll see that there's some characters there. You can see it's got a setting, that it's set in a time, and that there's something going on. And so what I want you to do is we're going to break into church groups again, and we're going to give you 10 minutes as a church group to figure out what is going on in this picture. What is going on in this picture? Now, I don't think once you break into the groups, you'll be able to see this picture. So you need to look at it now and study it and see what's there. And then Dean will move you into groups for 10 minutes to determine what's going on. Are you ready? Nod your heads if you're ready. I think I see some pensive nodding. Okay, Dean, go ahead and move us into groups. Wow, we're all here. That was quick. Good job, everybody. So I'm going to pick on somebody. I'm going to put up the picture again. And let's see. Let me see here. How come I don't show? Do you see the picture, or does it just say Zoom on your screen?
We see it.
There's a small picture there.
Okay, so you're looking at the picture, the big one?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So how about somebody from the Oakley Church? Linda or Diane or Rich? Tell us what's going on in this picture. Or what do you think? What did you guys come up with?
We came up with that it looks like there's bad news. It's an unwelcomed visit. And it's we were guessing in the early to late 60s for the time period. Yeah, he's definitely in the dominant position and she's not happy.
And she's not happy. And so what's going on, do you think? What's the conversation about?
We suspected it might have been an eviction.
Ah, an eviction. Okay. Interesting. Okay, let's go to Kensington. Jennifer, Dorothy, or Kevin from the Kensington Church, First Lutheran? What's going on in this picture?
Hi, this is Jennifer here. Well, we came up with a couple scenarios. The gal leaning against the post or near the post seems sad. So is the man consoling her? Did she have a loss in her life? Mm-hmm. The little girl behind is hugging the other lady, it looks like. Another scenario we thought was maybe, you know, with the racial difference there, maybe it's culturally they are new to the neighborhood and are very unsure or not feeling real confident about where they're at, and these people maybe are welcoming them. He looks, one comment was the gentleman looks very in tune to the conversation he's having with the lady near the pole there.
Yeah, I can see that. I can see that. How about anybody else? Anybody else like to comment on this? What do you see going on there?
This is Jill from Comstock. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
We titled it A Picture of Grace. We thought it was a farm family, a farm situation for the family of migrants living in this farmer's housing. The little girl's his girl, so she's used to playing there. The woman is very upset because possibly her husband is now absent for whatever reason. And he, by leaning on the pole, is kind of relaxed. It wasn't an arrogant position or angry, but that he is telling her, don't worry about it. You can stay here as long as you need to. You can work for me. I mean, so saying some kind of comforting, graceful words.
Really nice. That's a nice story that came out of the same picture. How about one more?
Well, I'll share, Rick. We actually kind of thought when Tammy and I talked about it, there was a great deal of intimacy between the man and the woman at the pole. That perhaps this was, you know, they were more than just acquaintances or more than just friends.
They were girlfriend and boyfriend.
And that, you know, maybe this, we were trying to figure out sort of who and, you know, sort of what ethnicity everyone was in the picture, because it's harder to tell beyond the gentleman and the little girl. So
that's great. Wonderful job, everybody. You guys did some great work there in terms of looking at this. Now, isn't that amazing? We were all looking at the same picture, but we came up with very different scenarios from each other in terms of the power that's taking place in that. In terms of what's happening, what the conversation might be about. This picture works really well for this exercise because it helps evoke so much feeling. Does anybody know where this picture actually comes from? Anybody ever see the movie Loving? This is about Loving versus Virginia. And the man leaning against the pole is actually husband and wife with that woman that is leaning on the pole as well, or next to him. And they're a married couple, and they're being forced apart by Virginia's backward laws at the time during the 1950s that wouldn't allow for interracial marriage. And they're just finding out that they're going to have to do something different. And they're going to have to seek for justice in their community, in their context. The woman back in the back, I think, is his mother or something like that. I've never seen the movie, but this picture evokes so much interesting thing. And it's funny, I've done this with African-American congregations. And just about every time I show this picture to an African-American congregation, it's always the white man seeking rent from the black lady. And that she's gonna have to pay up and she doesn't have the resources to do that. And another thing that's funny is when I do it up in Canada with Canadian congregations, they never see the racial difference, not like we do in American culture. They see a couple and they automatically gravitate to the fact there. So it's a profound exercise on race and justice and other things like that to look at that. The main reason I wanted to show you this picture and have us do that exercise is to think about the elements that go into telling a story. You notice that picture could become a very, very major focal point for writing a story. And there's 4 things that we have to keep in mind when we write a story. One is that it's about people in a place for a length of time where something happens. Let's say that together. People in a place for a length of time where something happens. So I'm sure some of you all know there are people that are good storytellers and there are people that aren't so good at telling stories. And whenever I used to have a friend, he was from Florida, and he would say, have I told you this story before? And he'd start telling me a story that I'd heard many times from him. And I'd say, yes, I've heard it before, but he would still tell the whole story anyhow. And he had to tell the whole story because he had to do it to piece all the pieces together. And he would forget things at the end. It was just a lousy way of telling stories. And it was a very frustrating experience because nothing was happening in his story. It wasn't, you had trouble figuring out when it was set. And it wasn't for any particular piece of time. And he would go to the end of the story and back to the middle of it and then back to the end again. It was just a horrible way of trying to follow it. So if you can kind of remember this mantra that a story is people in a place for a length of time where something happens. It's a very simple formula in terms of thinking about what we're going to do. Now, we're writing a story about something that's going to be in the future. We're going to be writing a story about something that does not yet exist. So there's a neat gift with that, and that is you're not going to be tied by anybody saying, we've never done that before. And you're not going to be tied by lack of resources. The only thing you're going to be tied by is lack of imagination on your own part. And so as we get to thinking about writing a story on our own about your church 5 years into the future, you're going to have the opportunity to do something that you always wish that the church could do. And I like to say that it's about the church making a difference in somebody's life, a church making a difference in a community or making a difference in a context. That's the kind of thing that propels us into the future in a different way. So I want to read you a future story from a congregation that we worked with some years ago, because then I can tell you what they've done as a result of it. And this is a church in Bloomington, Indiana. The reason we got called to work with them was they have this beautiful large building that takes up almost half a square block in a university city in southern Indiana. This street, I wish I had taken a picture of the whole street. It's on the University Avenue. The University of Indiana is here. It's on the avenue where all the restaurants and the pubs and all the art shops and everything like that are located right on that same street as the church building. And the church has a sanctuary that seats about 800 people, and they have 4 parking spaces. Can anybody see a problem with that? And so with the 4 parking spaces, that's been a limiting factor, but they were able to park in the parking lot of the bank across the street from the church. And people would do street parking, and that seemed to be manageable parking for this congregation. But then what happened was, see, I'm sorry, I just got a note here. Oh, yeah. And so what happened was with the church building was that the bank across the street where they were parking closed. And when the bank closed, they sold it to a hotel. And the hotel that was going in didn't have enough parking even for the hotel. So the hotel was taking up all the street parking. It took up their free parking spaces that they had, and now their congregation no longer had a place to park. And so they called us in because they needed to make a decision about whether or not they were going to continue as a congregation, or if they were going to relocate, or how they were going to live their life there. And through this process, they determined that they were going to stay. That was where their passion was, but they were going to have to make some changes in order to make things happen. So I'm going to read you the future story that they wrote. I'm only going to read you a portion of it because it's quite long, but I want you to get an idea that this is set in a time, it's set 5 years into the future, and what this congregation saw itself doing. A woman on the 6th floor of the Graduate Hotel pulls back the curtain of her guest room and looks out the window on Kirkwood Avenue. Across the street is the lovely old Gothic-style church. She recognizes it. After all, she's an IU alumni. In town with her husband for IU Parents' Day weekend. Their daughter is a sophomore at IU. How can so much time have passed? She remembers walking by the church when she was a young co-ed at IU. She reads the banner hanging outside the church that says, "Join us for jazz, 8:30 p.m. First Fridays following the gallery walk." "That sounds interesting," she says to herself. "I think I might do that." She feels a deep affinity for Bloomington, and for her part, she's still hopeful that someday she and her husband might retire here. Decides then and there to attend. She decides then and there to attend. She's not sure what a jazz Vesper service is, but it sounds intriguing and appealing somehow. Also, she's curious to see what the church looks like on the inside. It seems to beckon her inward. She'll tell her husband once he returns from the lobby. They can invite their daughter too, and maybe she'd like to go and join them with their friends. Meanwhile, across the street in First Christian Church's chapel gathering space, Tom was introducing a developer to the pastor, the board of officers, and trustees. After a year of congregational soul searching and intense discussions, the decision lifted up by the congregation was to seek out either a developer or an existing agency organization in need of downtown presence, who would be willing to engage in a long-term lease with First Christian, investing their capital and renovating all or some of their west wing of their building. In either case, the goal would be for FCC to provide downtown venue for needed services to the community in a way that was meaningful and compatible to their mission, and in so doing, create a new revenue stream. A team of congregants had conducted a due diligence investigation of the community needs and wants. And as a result, 3 potential developers, community partners, had been identified to provide blueprints for the building. Each was invited to give a presentation of their plan, and excitement was mounting to hear the proposals. Tom opened the meeting with prayer, and as he prayed out loud, he suddenly was overcome with gratitude as he praised God for their hope-filled future. His heart was full of love for the church members who over the course of 195 years, had embraced faith, courage, and imagination to bring a church to this point in history. George was in the sanctuary arranging the new wooden pew chairs for tonight's jazz Vesper service. Surprisingly, he had become quite a fan of jazz. How far we've come, he thought to himself. How far I've come. George still loved the high church stuff, but he was willing to embrace something new as well. With the changes to the sanctuary, it's wonderful that we can host so many different types of artistic performances and bring glory to God. I knew all along we were here meant to be on this corner, but now I can be really proud of our heritage in downtown Bloomington. Taking a quick break, George plopped down in one of the cushioned pew chairs and stretched out his legs. He says, "Man, this is nice. This is so much better than our previous pews." He surveyed the sanctuary, taking in the old with the new. Afternoon sunlight streamed in and bathed the high-beamed room, with the carpet all removed. The refurbished wood floor shone throughout. The magnificent Tree of Life stained glass window remained the commanding work of art that never failed to soothe the soul, simply gazing upon it. Surely, as each FCC churchgoer agreed, this is holy ground. Unbeknownst to him, the church organist slipped into the balcony, quiet as a church mouse. Arranging the music, she began to practice, and George dallied a little bit longer, indulging himself in the powerful music and letting his thoughts wander. Organ music now filled for a few short hours. A jazz trio will be on the reconfigured chancel, filling the room with piano riffs and blues notes. How cool is it that we can move these chairs around and arrange things in such a different way as to make this space work? That gives you kind of an idea of a future story, but it kind of expresses what the congregation had hoped for. They had hoped for developing arts within the community, getting more and more people into their church building, and they just lacked the flexibility to be able to do so. The way their church building was built before, it had the pews nailed to the floor. It had a pulpit that was made out of granite that could not be moved. They couldn't reconfigure their chancel space for anything other than a high church worship event. And so by getting the pews out and arranging the chairs in different ways, they were able to do different venues. And I'm here to tell you now that it's been about 4 years. This jazz service that they offer on Friday nights is their biggest church service during the course of the week. Averages about 120, 150 people on Friday night. at 8:30 in the evening. Now, a lot of churches would not start many programs at 8:30 at night, but they looked at their community. They looked at the people that were walking on that strip, and they said, how could we begin to engage our community in a different way? And they started this jazz worship event. The other part is they are making progress as a church on utilizing a big portion of their building for something other than just what it was built for in the 1930s. It was broken up into all these small Christian education rooms. They would bring in and house the homeless during the wintertime in this space, but it just wasn't space conducive for that kind of activity, and people would have full run of the whole building. So now they're working on trying to make different things work in that building in a way that makes a big difference. The easiest thing they could have done was sold the church and moved on, but they decided that this would be their future story instead. So I think the important part to recognize as we look at future stories is if you think about a good story, it almost always has a hook. There's got to be something. Now, I don't know if you remember the beginning of the story, but the beginning of the story is an IU graduate who is in the hotel building that hasn't been built yet and pulls back the curtain and looks across the street at the church and sees the sign. So you kind of get interested from that beginning, and you hear her thought process about whether she wants to engage in that. A great story has a personal connection. We don't have a personal connection with this one, but if you had, they did involve in that story the name of a beloved church member who was their curmudgeon in their church, who was against everything. He's the guy that's in there moving the chairs around and thinking about how far the church has come. So there was a personal connection in that story for the people that were there. If I'd gotten to the end, you would see the clear moral or purpose of the story. And the clear purpose of that story was once the church left thinking about what can we do to please us towards thinking how we could connect to the community, then it made a lot of difference in the world. There's more detail about the characters as you go along through it. And it's important in a good story to have conflict. Any novel that you read has significant conflict in it in some way. To write the story about the future of the church, that we decided one day that we were going to do X, Y, Z, and the whole congregation was happy with this and we all moved together, that's a ridiculous story, because anybody that's been in church work 15 minutes knows that's not going to happen that way. You know, there's going to be conflict. There's going to be people that have some other opinions about how the church could be best spending its time and what it's doing. And then finally, you have to pace the story so that it makes a difference. So as you can guess, we are going to do another exercise. And this exercise is going to be for 40 minutes, 20 minutes for you to work alone, and 20 minutes for you to share some stories back as a church. I want you to think back about your deep center again as a church. The deep center being the why of your congregation, whatever you thought of as your why. And this is just a starting point, because as you talk as a congregation, your starting point might change, but we're just going through an exercise of writing. And what I want you to do is to think about hooks that you can use, a creative story about somebody that the church is engaging in your congregation at this time, 5 years into the future. And then what I want you to do is, after you write that, is to review everything you know about your passion, your best step, and your resources. Think about that as you write your story. To create a future story about what your church is doing in 2025 and how it's making a difference. How's it doing it? What's it doing? How's it making a difference in somebody's life? Does that make sense to everybody? Nod your heads one way or the other. Does that make sense to you, Carl? Everybody nod your heads. Boy, I tell you, this is good. We're breaking into writing time. You can take a nap if you want, but we're going to know at the end if you did. So, Dean, if you're still awake, would you put us in our rooms? You're going to be there for 40 minutes. 20 minutes of it is your writing time, and then 20 minutes sharing time with your groups. Looks like we're all back. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you had a good time with each other. Were there any budding storytellers that came out of this last session? Do you have Ernest Hemingway in your writing group? How about some nods, one way or the other? All right. That's good to hear. Right now, at this point, what would be nice is to hear a couple samples of some stories. And I know that you are all Lutherans and that Lutherans are very humble people and that you never want to say that your story was any good. But is there somebody that would like to volunteer somebody else to read a story that you thought was really, that was good? If so, go ahead and volunteer them.
I'd like to volunteer Lisa.
Lisa. Oh, and somebody else said Joel Hood. So Lisa, where are you?
I'm here.
All right. Oh, let's hear your story. Would you mind sharing with us?
Okay. Hopefully I can read my writing.
Yes.
Okay. Yes, Rosalina thought, there is hope. What a comforting thought to look out the window at the church's mission statement and confirm what she knows to be true. At Calvary, there is hope. Rosalina looks back to her life 3 years ago when her family first came to Perham so that her husband Manuel could start his job at Shearer's. Little did they know how hard it would be to find affordable housing or what a struggle she and the kids would have after Manuel suddenly died. But Calvary was always there. Initially, they helped her family to find affordable housing through their Hope in a Home project, where the church worked with the city to employ grants that allowed them to renovate older homes in the city into affordable housing for families that arrived to fill needs in the workforces of factories in Perham and New York Mills. What a blessing to have a place to call their own and be able to get involved in the community and the church. Calvary soon became their home once the family became so familiar with Calvary through the annual block party, Celebrate Recovery, the backpack program, weekly community suppers, and the Vital Youth program their oldest was a part of. Sadly, after things had been going along so smoothly, Manuel collapsed one day at work. The doctors told her his heart simply gave out, but Rosalina feels it was her heart that gave out that day. Even now, her heartache is acute. In addition to losing the love of her life, she was also launched into single parenting with no source of income. The programs Calvary provided helped with both meals and social connections, but she had been really worried about what to do for housing. Thankfully, one of the members of Calvary, Cindy Olson, was able to provide Rosalina with an answer. Calvary's House of Hope, located just across the street from Calvary. It gives families like hers a short-term solution to housing needs until a permanent solution can be found. They've been there for 2 months now, and she truly does feel hope because she knows her friends at Calvary are working to help her secure some help. They have always been there, and they always will. That is hope, Rosalina thought.
Everybody, let's give some applause. And if you go down to the bottom, you'll see reactions, and you can give a hand clap with your little thing. That'll show her that we applaud. Good job, good job. So that was a great story because it was a believable story, for one thing. The name tells you a little bit of difference about what you can expect in terms of the people that are engaging in that. You made a huge difference in Rosalie's life. And just when you were starting to fall in love with her and her husband, he dies suddenly. So there's tension in the story. That's the important part. There's tension in the story, and people respond to that in a way that makes a huge difference. So that's a great start for a story. Great start for a story. Let's go to Joel Hood. Joel, you've been nominated and seconded to read your story. Where are you, Joel? Can you unmute?
I think I've unmuted myself. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, here's my story. Jimmy and a group of young teens and preteens were running from the small town police chief as she drove by the school. The group was out past the 10 p.m. curfew the town had recently put in place. Jimmy picked up a rock and threw it at the school as he shouted, "I'm never going back there." 5 years later, Jimmy would be volunteering at a Boys and Girls Club sponsored by a local church that was across from the school he had hated so much. That church had reached out to Jimmy and many other local youth who had become bored and angry with school and were about to drop out. But this church's newly formed Boys and Girls Club had offered a place for Jimmy and his friends to come to after school, to get a snack, to get a new pair of shoes, and to get help with their homework. Most of the group returned to school and graduated. Jimmy had now feels that he had to give back to a program that had helped him so much 5 years ago.
Oh, great, great. So this was, let's see, your Park Rapids, is that?
Bagley.
Pardon me, oh, Bagley Church, yeah. So this was kind of based on your Deep Center, and which was reaching out to youth and doing something that makes a difference. And it showed a story about a young person who had an attitude there at the beginning. You know, he's starting to throw rocks and things like that, and it shows a little bit of the transition. For 20 minutes of work, that is really good. That's a really good start for the story. It needs more development. You know, what kinds of things was he involved in other than getting a new pair of shoes? You know, how deep were those things that he got involved in that were life-changing? And the other part too is that sometimes we get wrapped up into the social change that a church can do, that we forget about the spirituality of that and what that does for the people that are working, that are volunteers working in that stuff, in terms of how that connects with their spiritual life as well. Really good. Sarah Forsberg, can you unmute yourself and share your story? You've been nominated.
All right, thank you. Well, our little center was building relationships. So with hesitant steps, she opened the large glass door of the north entrance. Cautiously, she entered the narthex with tears clouding her vision. Why, she asked herself, did I ever come back? But a familiar feeling returned to her, one she hadn't felt for 5 years. She labeled it peace. Life had been so chaotic since her last visit here. Surprised by the sense of calmness, she stopped and even said a prayer, something she hadn't done for a long time. Gratefulness was not part of her vocabulary. Walking toward the sanctuary with the stained glass windows, she heard someone singing. So she quietly opened the door and entered towards and sat in her family pew. Her eyes adjusted to the dim light, and quietly she sat absorbed in her own memories. Tap, step, tap, step. She turned to see an older gentleman walking towards the altar. He was hunched over, quite disheveled looking, and obviously unkempt. She didn't think she recognized him. She thought to herself. It was then that she noticed there was no organ, there was no piano, and the choir area where she sang in the choir was now a stage, and the cross was still in the same place. But then suddenly all the lights came on. Voices filled with laughter entered. They were completely disorganized, but everybody was happy. No one paid any attention to her. She was mesmerized by the change in the position of the old man. His back was straight.
Oh, very nice. Oh, we forgot to give both Joel and Sarah applause. So go ahead. Let's make sure we do that, and then we can move on. That was a wonderful story. Did the lady have a name?
Nope.
Okay. It would be helpful to have a name for the person that's the main character in the story. The other part too was a little bit more color about who she was. Would be a little bit more helpful, I think, for those of us hearing the story. But the scene that you painted in that sanctuary was fantastic. You could clearly get an idea what this church has been doing and the direction it's been heading in terms of revitalizing worship and doing something differently in that regard, and how they've been willing to make some changes. If I was going to take that story any further, I would talk about the struggle they had in making changes to worship. There isn't a church I know that hasn't done something in worship that just all hell breaks loose, you know, and that causes a lot of tension within the life of the church. And I think it's important to note that in the story as well.
Rick,
well, good job. Good job.
Rick, can I ask a quick question? These are great stories I'm hearing. Can't wait to hear more. And I find myself being curious too, if a part of the story is how the congregation is impacted by these encounters with the other or with the neighbor or with those that are being reached out to. How's that impacting the faith community as well?
Yeah, that would be good to hear in those stories. Those of us that have ever done mission trips, we know exactly what you're talking about. You know, when you do a mission trip for a congregation, you expect you're going to go to Haiti or someplace and you're going to make a big difference for everybody else. And what you find out is that it impacts you more greatly than what you've been able to give. How about one more story? Somebody want to volunteer a story just for fun? I mean, look, we didn't kill anybody that read their story. Everybody that read their story lived after they got done. How about another one? Anybody want to volunteer somebody else?
How about Stuart Larson?
Stuart, thank you for volunteering.
From Park Rapids.
Stuart, thank you for volunteering. Is he unmuted? Is he still with us? He probably left the meeting after that.
I'm unmuted now. You hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
I'm going to talk to you later, Bob.
All right.
I was born and raised in Park Rapids and came back for the annual 4th of July celebration to visit my family. During the week of the 4th, I was downtown at the 2nd Street stage and visited with childhood friends. I looked to the north from downtown and saw the old middle school housing apartments where I spent 5 years of my childhood. These years were to be forgotten. How the building had changed. I walked the 2 blocks to further inspect my former home. The signage announced that Calvary Lutheran Church Foundation had purchased the building 2 years ago and refurbished the building. I stepped into the building lobby and was surprised by the services and events that were scheduled for the residents in the church just across the street. There were meals, family counseling, job counseling, and youth programs scheduled during each week. This was not the relationship I remembered during my years in that apartment building. I crossed the street and entered Calvary. I was welcomed with open arms and marveled at the daily programming that was displayed on the calendar of the church. I returned to the 2nd Street stage downtown and ran into a boyhood friend, now a member of Calvary. He excitedly told me about the outreach ministry of Calvary. I asked him why he had joined Calvary. He explained that the word had been explained so that he understood his relationship with God. His relationship with God led him to serve others, which led to further strong relationships.
Great, great. So this is about somebody re-entering a community after being gone for a period of time and reconnecting with the life of the congregation. Oh yeah, we're supposed to give applause. Everybody react.
Don't need applause.
There you go. You got some thumbs up and some applause, things like that. So it's important to note that in that story, a little more color about who he was would be helpful and stuff like that. It was a great job for 20 minutes. I mean, that's not much writing time. And to get an angle, but you've got an angle for the story. You've got a place where it's starting and a hook that's starting to grab us, to want us as the listener to begin to ask questions about who this man is, what he's gone through, and how he's gotten to the place where he is. And then to make the connection with somebody who was inspired by their connection with the church life already, talking about how the gospel's become more relevant for them and how on fire and passionate they are for the life of Christ that's within them, is an added bonus, because that says that we've internalized and that we're growing in our faith as individuals. Good, strong story. All of you did a good job, I'm sure. And some of you probably are saying to yourself, oh my gosh, this really is hard to do. And some of you went, gosh, I wish I had more time. to do this, and I think you're going to have more time. So each church group, you're going to want to go through these 4 questions. As you think about the stories that you heard today, which are the settings that seem to make the most sense? So in all of those settings weren't necessarily inside the church building. Some of the settings were outside. So for example, the first story about Rosalie was looking outdoors, was kind of the setting of the church. The church with the youth program where the boys throwing the rock, that's outside. You know, think about the settings of which you're talking about the development of your future stories. What are the inspirational ideas that you want to see kept? Out of the stories that you heard in your church group, you need to ask yourself the question, is this really our passion? You know, because if you can't shame people into a passion. It has to be something that exists within them. You can't inspire something that's not there. And so is this an area where our congregation has some passion? You need to ask yourself that question and make sure that's a part of that story. Let's see here. And let's see, there were things not mentioned in the future stories. So in every future story, there's something that's not mentioned. And sometimes we need to bring that out. What are you going to let go of as a church in order to accomplish this new future story? You know, so if you can, remember we talk about conflict in a story and how important that is, sometimes you have to talk about how painful it was to let go of the Ladies Altar Guild or to let go of some other program within the life of the church so that you had the volunteer time and the energy to devote to this new thing that you're doing. So don't be afraid to name some things that have to be let go of in order to do that. One of the stories I remember hearing a long time ago is there was a church that averaged about 60 in worship on Sunday. And for them to have a quorum at their board meeting, they had to have 40 people. That's 2/3 of their worship attendance in church in order to do a board meeting. And so they let go of having this massive church board and convened only a board of 8 people for that church. And they talked about how hard it was to let go of all that. People felt disempowered by that and other hard feelings. It's just important to name those things in a story. And then what were things not mentioned in the story that should be in the future story? So, you know, sometimes in order to engage in some sort of impacting thing like doing a soup kitchen or doing a feeding program within the life of the church, there's all kinds of regulations and health code things that you had to go through. You know, you want to mention some of those things. You just don't want to make that the main thing of the story, but you can show your conflict. You know, we had to overcome some certain areas in order to make those things happen. So you guys have done really well today. I think for doing this on Zoom, I want to again thank Dean for all the hard work he did, trying to keep us in and out of our group sessions and keeping us together. I want to thank Hope for her work to sign up for a quick account when we had to redo the whole thing again. Of course, I want to thank Keith for all the wonderful work he does all the time, keeping us all together and keeping us on the same page. I work with a lot of different DEMs, and I wouldn't say this in front of Keith, but you got one of the best in the whole darn country working there. And it's Northwest Minnesota of all places to think where you get the best guy. Your next steps as a team, and Rachel's going to close us here in a few moments, but your next step as a team is to complete and polish a future story and continue to connect with your coach as you do this to get a good final finished product. Remember the things that we want to see. We want to see those hooks. We want to see some specificity to the process. Don't just say we started doing community service. You want to say specifically what you're doing. No general statements, but as clearly and as compelling as you can. Make sure it's about your passion. Make sure you don't worry about the resources so much, whether you have them or not. But if you can imagine how you could use your resources differently for that, that's great. And then get that future story ready for our next session when we gather together in June. What is the date of our next session, Keith?
It is June 27th, and we'll we're all waiting for how things unfold with the pandemic and the lessening as time goes on with gathering parameters, with social distancing being involved. And we'll have a better picture as we get closer to the end of May and to June, whether we can actually adhere to the guidelines that are for safety and health and be in a room together, literally at Grace in Detroit Lakes, or we do one more Zoom workshop experience. I'm thinking that in October, our final workshop, we could be together for that. But we'll see how June 27th looks as we get closer to it.
And do you have any other closing words that you'd like to share with people before I turn it over to Rachel?
The only word is that there'll be an email going out that will have the link to this taped workshop along with some attachments that are meant to be by way of review, but also you could work with going forward in this next series of focus. And also included in that is a link to a Survey Monkey, a few questions seeking to learn from you what we're learning together that would be very beneficial for our larger church as well, to know what it is you're experiencing and learning on the ground. So that would be forthcoming in a number of days after this workshop.
Great. Also, you've all done work on assessments, and you've all done work on gathering information through your community interviews. We kind of like to keep track of those as well. So if you could forward a copy of that to Keith, we would really be greatly benefited by seeing what you've come up with in terms of your assessment of your congregation. You want to say more, Keith? You're muted.
Thank you for that. What that also helps us with is how we together as Synod, and especially Synod staff, can be appreciative and attentive in any way that we think might be of support to you as well. So that would be good. Helps us learn the lay of the land. We can benefit from that.
Great. Well, how's everybody doing? You got a thumbs up or a thumbs down? Or that's what I like about the Zoom conferencing is you can only give me a thumbs up. It doesn't allow for thumbs down. Let's turn it over to Rachel for our closing time together.
Okay. Well, we, as we are a church that's sort of dispersed out of our buildings at the moment, but yet we are together, it is important, I think, to be reminded of not only who we are to God, but that we belong to, and that we are God's, but that we are this to, that's what we are to one another, that God considers us beloved, and we are to regard one another as beloved. So here's what I'd like you to do is take a finger and find the cross on your forehead that was given to you at baptism, and trace the cross, please, and repeat after me. I am a child of God.
I am a child of God.
God's always and forever.
Always and forever.
Let us pray. Good and gracious God, we give you thanks for this day. And we give you thanks for your Son, in whom we are bound up together as your people. Bless us and keep us, strengthen us, and give us peace. In your name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you everybody for coming. If you want to leave a comment on the chat room, that would be great. Take care.